It took me a year to hunt you down to come to our podcast.
The Battlefield franchise, Gears of War, a Battlefront game as well.
Photogrammetry as a part of the production process. Where do we start?
You can download this software, you can play with it. It's fairly simple to use.
I also remember you almost died one of the times that you were scanning.
Within seconds, my vision closed into a pin.
What is a good kit?
We started trying out like polarizing filters. Photogrammetry is really amazing. It's just replacing one step of your workflow, basically.
Hi everyone, my name is Nanelli Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted Speakeasy. Today we have an amazing guest, Chris Matthews. Hi Chris.
Hi, I'm not sure about amazing, but thanks for having me.
Well, it took me a year to hunt you down to come to our podcast. And this is how much work and love and care we're putting into organizing this. So if you guys really appreciate what we're doing, please like, subscribe, share, tell your buddies if you're actually learning anything from the podcast that we're putting together. What makes Chris special, and if you guys haven't had a chance to look into his previous achievements, which are spectacular, Chris is currently a studio art director and co-founder of Ridgeline Games, which is a first-party EA studio working on Battlefield narrative. Is that correct?
That's right. We are the narrative studio for the Battlefield franchise.
What actually stands out a lot for me in your experience, which I'm sure other people would want to learn more about too, is there's at least two studios that you were a co-founder and art director, like your current one and The Motive. How does that work? Can you tell us a little bit more?
It's partly being in the right place at the right time. Having the opportunity just to work on, incredible franchises like Gears of War. And it was kind of serendipity. We were moving on to Gears of War 4 and we were busy in the process of, working through the concepts of what that game would be. I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but my phone number found its way into the hands of some recruiters at EA who contacted me, and we began talking about the possibility of a new studio in Montreal, and of course working with Jade Raymond, who is the founder and GM of that studio. These were all kind of like lifelong dreams that I had to be in charge of starting an art team from the ground up. And I think that really goes back to when I was a lead originally. I loved growing teams. I loved putting together really talented groups of artists and the magic that comes from that. So, the opportunity to literally do it from ground zeros and with such a great GM in the studio, it was a fantastic time in my life.
What makes it different from being a co-founding art director versus, an art director? From what I've heard a little bit from what you just shared is allowing you to build the team from the ground up. And you're currently doing that at Ridgeline Games, right?
My first experience with art direction was going from being a lead to an art director, very specifically on the Gears of War project. And we had a known franchise that Xbox at the time was bringing back. And so, really well-trodden subject matter, absolute industry legends who had created that franchise. And so I got to kind of look at that with our art team and basically, combine modern technologies with the old art direction and kind of come up with what would be a new style for the franchise. That was a very different thing than starting a studio from scratch. We had everything from finances to hiring to worry about. We wanted to collaborate with multiple different studios during that effort. Of course, that project at Motive, the first one out of the gates was Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was a lifelong dream to ship a Battlefront game as well. And working with Lucasfilm added another huge sort of tier of complexity to the art direction. That being said, I have way more support doing all of those things because, like I say, massive support from Jade, who had obviously done incredible things in the industry already and had created lots of different games. we had some amazing producers and a recruiting team as well. So it really did have a wealth of opportunities to find amazing artists as well. I mean, the difference in complexity is really that, right? Like you're art director and you need to be looking at like an entire business model with your team to see how you want to grow that studio and keep it healthy. And of course, you want to go on to do other things after that as well. So just getting people in the door for that project isn't enough. You want to bring people in and kind of build a family that wants to stay together and work together for the next decade and beyond.
We are a family. All of us.
Do you have some practices that allow your team to feel like a team and a family, especially in a remote way, that promotes creative, that promotes, collaboration, feedback, and just going out of the box, especially when you're building something new?
For a lot of us, finding those communication paths where you could be present for your team, but still have time to do work and still have time to paint concepts and kind of generate work it's created a lot of challenges. The flip side of that now is everybody who's joined Ridgeline and many people I meet in the industry now are just so ready to over communicate what they're doing and, get that work out there. I tend to run doctor's hours where I have like periods of time that I just open up. We have several different communication methods that we use, and so people just reach out. We also run like a number of clubs, and I can't take any credit for this. We have like amazing people in our studio who like run gaming sessions. We have kind of get-togethers where we play games. We do all the stuff we would do in the studio, but as best we can remotely for the time being.
I remember at one of your previous projects, you had some challenges with regards to building look development. And one of the ways that you've sorted out is just putting all the artists in the same room. Can you tell me more about that?
It was around 2016. I read this really interesting article about crunch and what it was doing to the industry. And, having been in the games industry in my earlier career and kind of subject to the, ebbs and flows of crunch, and not really wanting to do it, I started trying to take on board some of the, philosophies around how to avoid that without just using brute force time. Well, throughout a couple of studios and with other colleagues, I developed this kind of battle room, focus room approach to like solving complex challenges without having people sit in the office for like 12 hours plus, right? So what we did was in the first test bed version of this, we got together just like our best artists from all around the franchise and put them in a room with leads and support, and we bought lunch and and just basically had everybody in that room together just to solve one problem. And it worked so well, we went on and continued to do that. And I expanded it a little bit, and I've used that process for look development. I've used it for avoiding crunch when we've got to the end of projects. And yeah, it's just like a really fun, innovative time. Everybody, of course, like when you've really focused on something for a week or two, you can be really exhausted with that thing. But you've actually come to work at a normal time and gone home and seen your family at the end of the day and not really worked any extra overtime. So
can you give me a couple examples of the challenges or the issues that you were able to solve?
An example of where like I have used this technique is on like finishing a part of a world, for instance, right? So I have animators, cinematic folks, content developers, lighting, VFX. It also tends to be a lot of the people that are downriver in the production process that arrive, have to kind of come after the design and the content has been approved and put in the game. Getting all of those folks together and really like dialing in a specific cutscene.
Looking at the majority of your portfolio, it's very, very realistic, especially like the last years of your production. So, and I know that I will use the word gurus of photogrammetry, and the photogrammetry is a big part of the pipeline that you are using. So we'd love to get to know, like, how does photogrammetry allow you to achieve the realistic looks or the hyper realistic looks for your games, and maybe what are the challenges that you have encountered using that pipeline?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a journey, and it's been a really exciting one for me. So I have to credit an artist back in, I think it was 2008, 2009, Richard Smith, a character artist back in the UK. Absolutely incredible experience. We began working together again at Crytek, and he had this notion of photogrammetry that he'd been learning about. And basically we got involved in some like very, very early rigs, like super early, having to import parts and buy really remote software. And there was no concept of processing software like Agisoft at the time, or certainly not available to us. That's where it began for me. And this idea that you could take just photographs and, through this kind of elaborate process of matching them together, start to create point clouds, and the point clouds could become 3D models. It opens something up in my mind that I just, enjoyed, and I started playing around with the technologies and never really stopped. So smash cut to a few years later, I find myself in North America, and of course working on Gears of War, which is like super stylized. It has a very distinct look, but it also has some elements that are quite realistic inside it. It's a really interesting mixture of different styles. We had a texture artist who was very, very interested in specifically scanning textures. And that kind of like brought home to me that if we explored some of that, we might be able to shortcut some of the challenges we were having. Then we moved forward a little bit, and I was given an absolutely incredible opportunity to work with Andrew Hamilton, who I sort of credit as one of the major influencers in the photogrammetry scene. And I just learned an awful lot. Like we traveled the world, and we had teams traveling the world to create worlds for Star Wars. We've gone from the days where photogrammetry is very one hit. You can only use things from a certain angle, you can only use them in a certain way, to now doing lots of procedural work with Houdini and other tools to really make photometric based content as flexible as any other content that you might author inside of a sculpting environment, for instance.
Okay, I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start.
Well, so if you're here, I have a lot of questions.
I also remember you almost died one of the times that you were scanning in Japan, right?
We were in a very remote location, staying in a place where there were no other humans for a really long way. And very kindly, the place where we were staying brought in a local chef who would basically, or cook, who would turn up with a bunch of different foods and just prepare them for us, because we were so remote. We'd just eaten a lot of raw food, and it had been a really long period of time. And I think we were all like talking about eating, cooked fish or cooked steak or something like that. Anyway, so they fried us some fish up, and it was delicious and incredible. And I reached right in and grabbed a cheek of this delicious fish that was on the table and ate it. And within seconds, my vision closed into a pin. And I remember looking at my lead artist's eyes, and he was just asking me if I was okay. Anyway, we were very, very remote. And in my head, I was like, I don't want to ruin the trip by needing any kind of evacuation. So perhaps the wrong decision was, I was like, let's just go and wait out whatever's going on here. So we sat in one of our rooms all together because they were keeping an eye on me.
So what was it? What happened?
Well, I think when all said and done, it was thought that maybe this fish had actually been caught dead and in a net or something, and may had actually bitten a blowfish or been poisoned itself, and I ate whatever the second-hand version of that was. So Yeah, I got properly checked out when I got back to Montreal, and everything was fine. But yeah, boy, did I feel crook for a day or two.
What is it with those fucking fish, man?
Let's imagine I'm in your studio and we're going for a very realistic project, and we do want to have photogrammetry as a part of the production process, but we've never done it. We don't have anyone on the team who has done it. We don't know what equipment we should buy and what are the pitfalls of this process. Like, where do we start?
The most amazing news about photogrammetry, I think, and just the whole process and where it is in the industry, is the companies involved in the processing software. Not only do you have to take these amazing photographs, which are quite specific around the way that you take them to maximize the quality, but then you need to process these, and the software itself needs to do a really good job of lining everything up, de-lighting the image so you don't end up with shadows baked into your work, and then giving you a model that you can kind of clean up really easily and only process the bit you really want. The good news now is the major players in that industry have got mobile apps, and they've literally bought that home. So whether you're an indie developer or working in a big AAA studio, you can download this software, you can play with it. It's, at least on the mobile end of it, actually fairly simple to use. It's really no more difficult than creating a photosphere.
Is there any examples of on the lower end, on the mobile side of the software, that you would recommend, and also on a higher end?
The lower end, I guess, is always going to be like the mobile version of the full desktop software, but Reality Capture does a fantastic job, their software capturing reality there. So like I say, if you're just wanting to experiment with it, find a mobile phone app or a tablet app. Take your phone out, find an object, look for neutral lighting, and then just work around it, follow the instructions. If you're taking a DSLR out with you, it's kind of similar. There's a bit of a weird dance that we do when we're actually shooting stuff, where we kind of create a hemisphere around the object. You kind of have to pretend that you're a 3D scanner and move in a very specific way. And what you're really looking for is large amounts of redundancy. So lots of overlap between your images, and then stepping around the object, stepping back from the object, until you've got a very, very complete idea of what the whole image, the whole object looks like. The difference between the mobile apps, which is why they're a really great starting place, especially if you're kind of a hobbyist or you're just looking to experiment with it, is they leave your photos that you've taken floating in space virtually as you move around. So you can actually see where you've taken photos and maybe where you have gaps. When you get to a DSLR, obviously you don't have that ability to do that. So you just have to get real good at the dance where you move around things and you move out, and you get real good at forgetting. Yeah, that's right. Kind of noticing where you've maybe not taken photographs and getting them. And one tip we often have for people that we're just training is even before you take the photograph, just hold your breath for a second and then take the photo, because you're looking to get as much light into the camera and a real short depth of field as well. What you want is a separation between your subject matter and the background as well. You need to set the aperture on your camera and the speed of your camera so you get as much light in as possible, but you're not actually blurring your subject matter, but you are separating the background. So obviously learning how your camera works and learning your camera settings is the key to good digital content. Photogrammetry and photometric based textures and stuff is really amazing, obviously, if you're trying to generate games that lean in on photorealism. But in my own work and my own kind of explorations around it, I've used it to drive using Substance. I've kind of begun with photo scan textures and actually stylize them, and that gives you a totally different look as well to stylized projects.
if I'm going to like semi-professional, or like I'm here to like invest a little more to get the better quality of the kit that you have? And if so, what is a good kit? It's just a camera, or is there some other gear that needs to be purchased?
So I would say any reasonable DSLR, probably a full frame sensor would be ideal. We're in kind of a generation of cameras right now where the ability to shoot way higher fidelity images than you could ever really process with current generation hardware is here. So like, yeah, you shouldn't feel that just because you can't get the most top tier camera that you're not going to be able to do this work. I think a color chart is invaluable. So like X-White color charts work beautifully, and typically we'll carry those out in the field with us. The color chart allows you, because you put it in the image and then you start shooting the frame, that allows you to come back later and, if needs be, modify your HDRs to like normalize the lighting. I think it was around 10 years ago, like we started trying out like polarizing filters. So I'm sure anybody that's got any experience with photogrammetry has probably experienced models where they look pretty good. You've got a really good range of photos and you just end up with a hole somewhere in the mesh when it gets produced. So a polarizing filter does a great job of taking all of that glare out of the photo. So even if you have a color aberration in your mesh, you don't have a hole, and that's much easier to fix. And then I would just say, make sure you've got yourself like a decent sun hood. So the cap that quite often you get with longer lenses that you can flip off and turn around just to take any glare out of an image if you need to. And yeah, I mean, I used to travel with prime lenses, like specifically set up to give me the depth of field that I needed. But in more recent years, I've been taking zoom lenses. That ability to stand back further or come in a little bit closer to your object, and then lock your lens at that distance really, really helps. And I guess like the last pro tip, and one where I see a lot of people making mistakes as they come into it, is adjusting their lens and exposure potentially between frames. So for instance, if I was going to go shoot a small building, and as I worked around it, it had one sunny side and one dark side, you're actually better off trying to find your starting point somewhere in the middle, maybe on the end of the building where it's kind of transitioning between light and dark, and you've got your average pattern there. Because quite often, and this is where the HDRs are amazing, you can, on the dark side, you can bring back some of that detail by adjusting your images in Lightroom. What you can't do is bring the data back if you overexpose, because you lose it where the image clips. So that's like a little pro tip learned the hard way about like where to start on an image.
I have a question. Is there anything that, when you read about photogrammetry and people are like, oh, this and this, absolutely you should buy, and you found it absolutely useless?
Nothing that's totally useless. Things that have become more difficult to use over time. Maybe drones. When drones kind of first hit the mainstream and the camera fidelity got good enough that we could actually do some decent photogrammetry with them, they were fairly unregulated as well, and so that was great. At this point, it's very, very difficult to use drones in lots of different locations around the world, and so like that piece of kit gets underused, but is an amazing tool if you can use it.
Is there some painful lessons that you had? Because you mentioned like previously the process of the backing up data was very, very extensive, and I would assume you had to have like a bunch of hard drives and cards. And have you ever been in a situation where you like ended up somewhere and you were like, I don't have this and that, like anything that you were like, oh, and you're in a remote location, there is nowhere, like, I don't know, Machu Picchu or somewhere, and there's no store or nothing. So like, what would you want to be overly prepared with?
Preparation and testing everything you've got. Practicing locally to you is the best way to avoid that. That has fallen down once or twice, just like unforeseen things, such as like data storage connects in this scenario, but it doesn't connect in this scenario, or, just even missing a tiny connector or something like that. I mean, having to ship in from somewhere, just like a little $5 plug just to like bridge a gap is super frustrating. And only really happens if new technology gets introduced and it hasn't been properly field tested. I would say if you're going to invest in this type of work, right, it can, if you do it well, replace up to 70 or 80% of the work that you would have to do to sculpt something. But as part of that work, I sort of strongly believe that you should field test everything and make sure that everybody is well trained. One other little thing that we learned was we always take the same group of people if possible on these trips, right? Like everybody wants to travel, everybody wants to go on the trips. But very early on in doing this type of work, we learned that actually having that same group of people who intrinsically know each piece of kit that they're carrying and exactly what it's for, and each person has a different specialization. Some people look at textures, some people look at props, some people look at building, some people look at vegetation.
As well as it sounds like that group of people is really fun to party with. And they can save your life if you're eating the fugu fish in a very remote location.
You certainly grow very, very close together. Whether anyone has enough strength at the end of the day to lift a beer is a different thing, because usually everybody's like, let's shower, back up data, and eat and go to bed, because you're starting early the next day. So, yeah.
We are a team. One for all and all for one.
You just mentioned that there's obviously different, I would say, organic and non-organic, larger cliffs versus like smaller stones. There's foliage. You also referred to shooting more hard surface and not movable objects like the actual ships from Star Wars. What are the tips or tricks? What are the difficulties? We can go into large scale environment pieces versus smaller scale, organic versus hard surface.
First and foremost, having an artist who's incredibly passionate about the specific specialization they're interested in really is half the battle. So right now I have one of the most incredible vegetation leads I've ever worked with. And, she's as much botanist as she is 3D artist, and it's inspiring to work with her, because when I'm like, I don't know what that is, she often tells me without referencing anything whatsoever, and that's amazing. When we shoot hard surface stuff, like I say, like one of the big foobarrs is like everything has some level of specularity, but how much specularity and shininess is too much to shoot, and like what is too much, and the technology's ability to kind of circumvent that is getting closer and closer. And we're starting to think about new ways to approach that, whether it be LiDAR scanners, laser scanning. I'm experimenting in my own time with hard light scanning, which is like just using structured light, and it helps circumvent some of the problems that you might have with that. It has its own problems. So basically, again, it's just making sure you select the right tool for exactly what you're trying to achieve. But this is, of course, like for high-end AAA content. If you're starting out, or you're just an indie game developer and you want to experiment with this as a method to sort of speed up your workflow, you can get some really incredible scans out of like a mobile phone scan, and easily good enough to 3D print or play around with, and then maybe you can work on top of that, right? It's just replacing one step of your workflow, basically.
Now I just need to pick up some skills in order to travel the world with Chris and go to remote locations, ideally not die, and also pick up some muscle to be able to carry a ton of gear on myself. But I honestly think I've learned so much today. I'm so grateful, Chris, for you sharing all your knowledge with regards to your process. And I'm sure a lot of people gonna love this episode. Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I hope we can do more of these.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Sorry it took so long to get here.
No, it's perfect.